Good evening, everybody. I forgot to unmute my mic then, otherwise that was going to be possibly the smoothest transition between one thing and another that you have ever seen on this show. Unfortunately, it was not to be. That's not to say I did not try. Good evening. Hope everybody is doing well. As a few of you have mentioned in the chat, unfortunately, we have lost a very good friend of ours. Thomas, I knew pretty well through talking to him on Facebook, and the fact that he was pretty much ever present for a good period of time, maybe more than a year, maybe 18 months, on both this show and also the Sunday Night Live show. And I'd had lots of really good, entertaining conversations with him. Also on Mike at Music to Motion's after show Zoom calls, which he attended quite a few of. And so Thomas was there at quite excuse me. He was there at quite a few of those, and he was a really, really great bloke. And when I received the news, it was pretty shocking because I had actually just been speaking to him just recently, and he seemed to be in pretty good. He seemed to be in a pretty good place, and seemed to be, certainly outwardly seemed to be all right. And we were just, having a good joke, a good laugh amongst ourselves. So, unfortunately, it was pretty shocking, to say the least, when I got that news that he had died. So, unfortunately, I cannot start tonight's show by calling his name out in the chat like I have done for pretty much every show for the last considerable length of time. So I won't be able to name check him as Thomas from the Philippines, very sadly. And I know a lot of you guys that are in the chat knew him and had talked to him, and he was part of our community. He was part of our family. And we all thought of him as just a part of it, and a part of the family, a part of the furniture, and just somebody that we spoke to regularly and that we knew. So it's pretty sad. It's very, very sad for his wife and for the two young kids that he leaves behind. And so I have been taking time to pray for them and to think about them, because this is a pretty devastating time for them. And I don't know how we could, but I would like for us to be able to do something as a community for Thomas's family, if it is at all possible. So I'm going to probably have to talk to Louis from Alps Media and Mike from Music to Motion and put our heads together and see what we can do for them, because they are alone now, and there's two young kids there that no longer have a dad, and there's a wife there that no longer has a husband. So I would like it, if it were possible, for us to be able to do something for them. So I'm going to talk to Mike and to Louis, and we're going to see what we can come up with, and then either on Sunday or next week, I'll come back to you and kind of talk to you guys about what we've kind of thought of, and see if it's something that you guys want to get behind. So if you're wondering why I sound emotional, it's because right now I am emotional. So we are dedicating tonight's show, and we are dedicating the rest of HST broadcasts to Thomas's memory for the foreseeable, until further notice. So tonight's show is dedicated to him. Sunday Night Live will be dedicated to him as well. And Jonny's show will be dedicated, Jonny's next show, which should be on Thursday, will be dedicated to his memory as well. So yeah, that's pretty much all really I have to say on that. It's been a tough few days. Jonny unfortunately is not able to obviously be here tonight, so which is why I'm hosting Songwriting Simplified. The guy needs a break, quite simply. He's had a lot going on, and so he really just could use a break. So we are going to allow him to do that tonight. And maybe I will have Jonny on the show on Sunday, if he's around and if he's able to. We'll fix that up. We'll see what we can do for that. Tony says it would be nice to do something for the family. Yeah, absolutely. It's something I've thought about, and those of you that may or may not have known Nick Critchley, who was one of the admins of the Persona Studio One Facebook group, and also the Studio One Sessions. He started the Studio One Sessions group on Facebook. Nick died last year, and he pretty much died alone and had no family to speak of, and had, he died with nothing, and with no will, with no provisions to be able to have a funeral. And the whole Presonus community came together, and we funded a funeral and a cremation urn for him so that he could be laid to rest next to his beloved wife, who had died some 10 years before Nick did. So I am pretty confident that as a community, we can do something for Thomas's family. Because you guys are all awesome. You guys are the most caring, kind, and generous people that I think I have ever met. And some of you I have met, some of you I have not had the pleasure of speaking to you in person, but I know from your contributions in the chat and to emails that you send to Jonny and emails that you send to me, you guys are amongst the kindest, most generous, most caring and considerate people that I have ever known on the internet, to be honest. So I'm pretty sure that we can all come together to do something for Thomas's family. So absolutely. But anyway, let's get to it, because we're already like 14 minutes into the show. And Billy was first in the door, followed by Kyle and Ironweed Studios. Lollipop Guild is here. Ironweeds, as I mentioned, is also here. Tony Stringer is here. Alps Media, John Edgar is here as well. Good to see you, John. And John Hawk is here as well. Don Oliver is here. Dwayne is here. Good to see you, Dwayne. Thank you for coming, mate. It's always good to have you here. Paul Morgan's here. Ronald Figura is here. He says, I'm here, my favorite show. Ronald, that's very kind. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Today is definitely a little bit unplanned and a little bit chaotic, so I hope you guys will be gentle to me. Secret Squirrel is here, which is awesome. And Harley Bob is here as well. And I think I'm working my way down to the bottom. So if you are watching and I have not name checked you, because I like to name check as many people as I can. Obviously, as we get bigger, it's going to become harder and harder to do that. But yeah, if you want to be name checked, say hi in the chat. That's all you got to do, is just say hello. And especially if you have never seen this show before, and you're kind of curious as to what Songwriting Simplified is all about, or if you're curious about who I am and what I'm about, and if you're curious about Sunday Night Live, then say hi in the chat. Let me know who you are, so that, I can connect with you, because, you know, I like to connect with people, not just talk to a camera. So yeah, if you're here and you've never said hello in the chat before and you just kind of sit passively in the background, now's your chance to stick your name in the chat and say hi, and I will call you out by name, and it'd be nice to put a name to you. Pretty much everybody else who has done that has formed this little community. Speaking of which, H2K Music Lab's home studio is here. He says, he or she, I'm not sure whether you are he or she, but they say, hello everyone. Hello, good to see you. Awesome. So we've got a good little gathering here, which is great. So tonight I was going to talk about Thomas, obviously, because you know, his loss is our loss. You know, his family's loss is our loss as well. So left a bit of a hole for us to try and fill somehow. But also I wanted to talk about songwriting, obviously, because that's what this show is all about. I wanted to take your questions about songwriting, music theory, arranging, composing, whatever it is that you're into and you've got questions about it and how you can do that in Studio One, or in Notion, then get your questions into the chat. But I wanted to talk a little bit about working in minor keys and how you can make a minor key not sound sad. I know it's hard because that interval just sounds sad because, you know, it's dark compared to this. This is kind of nice and bright, the major third. And then the minor third interval is just dark. It just is. Now, there are minor keys that are more dark than others, just like there are major keys that are kind of more strident, more bright than others. Why that is? Well, there are lots of scientific reasons as to why some keys are darker and brighter than others, and why some keys just seem to sound really rich and round compared to some other keys. When you're just like, hey, it's a major key, it's a minor key. Surely a major key should just sound major and a minor key should just sound minor. You'd think it's as simple as that, right? It isn't. The reason is because what we did a few hundred years ago, back in the kind of 17th century, in fact, was we decided to equalize the difference in interval between semitones right across the keyboard. From the low all the way down to the high, the interval, the distance between there and there is the same as there to there. It's exactly the same distance. However, before this whole thing was equalized out into exactly equal intervals, it wasn't. And so what you had was a situation where the lower you went on the keyboard, the wider that interval between semitones got, and thus the flatter the sound and the darker the tone. But when you went further up the keyboard, the brighter it became, because the intervals would get smaller. And so distinguishing between semitones as you went further up the keyboard became quite hard. And some keys sound really, really awful, and some keys sound kind of okay. So when we equalized everything and we created something called equal temperament, it meant that you end up with some keys that sound bright and some keys that don't. Some keys that sound round and some keys that don't. And that's because when we equalized everything, we also equalized the harmonic series that which is kind of like the overtones above the fundamental tone of each note. So this note here, this D, has a fundamental tone, which is the loudest thing you hear, which is why, you know, most of us will say, yes, that's a D. But there are also a whole range of overtones that make up that fundamental tone. that go above that you don't tend to hear quite so much, but they are there. And even though you might not be able to hear them, you can certainly feel them. And you can certainly feel them emotionally, which is why the key of D major sounds quite bright and strident. The key of E flat sounds round and stately, which is why a lot of hymns are written in the key of E flat, or a lot of anthems for, countries' national anthems that are written in the key of E flat, because it has that nice, well-rounded shapeliness to it. Can I really talk about music and those kind of... I don't know. Anyway, it just sounds round. B flat just sounds... it has a stateliness about it. So that's kind of why that is. So that was a large, long preamble as to writing in minor keys and how to make minor keys not sound sad, but sound urgent, and give them a sense of, kind of forward motion. Some of that's to do with how is to do with rhythm. Like, one thing I think you might notice is if you listen to theme tunes from news shows, you might find, theme tunes to news programs, they have a sense of urgency about them. And the reason why is because they want you to pay attention. They want you to be focused and alert and attentive. This is important. You are about to receive important information that may shape your immediate future, or may warn you of something you need to do. So, news shows can kind of, they can have that. So, there's a lot going on in that little mock news theme that I wrote and I played a little bit last week. But, there's a lot packed into that. It's in a minor key. But the other thing that it features... the melody starts off with this rising sequence of fourths. Fourths don't really resolve that much. They create this kind of open sound. So over that kind of, kind of against that low C that's kind of giving you that sense of urgency. It's a little bit dark, but it's not sad. It's dark and it's trying to grab your attention. So there's lots of open sound. And then it finally, that sense of tension kind of gets broken because we move away from the C minor kind of to this. Which is kind of a little bit kind of slightly jazzier chord changes. F minor, G minor, A flat major 7 to B flat 11. And then we finish on this chord, which never resolves. It's kind of a sus4 chord. There's the 4. And it never resolves to either there or to there. And the reason why I didn't resolve it is because exactly what you just heard. Suddenly it becomes dark and sad and lonely. I didn't want that. I wanted to keep that sense of urgency, so I never resolved it. So minor keys don't have to sound like a funeral. You know, they don't have to sound dirgy. I mean, obviously I'm playing it low down, so it sounds a little bit dirgy. You know, if I played it up here. If I gave it a slightly more kind of disco thing going on, maybe? You know, why not? And chuck in some jazzier harmony. And all of a sudden, it doesn't sound sad anymore. The rhythm has made it sound less sad. And then kind of the way I treated some of the harmony made it sound less sad. So you can have that sense of urgency, that sense of forward motion without it ever sounding sad, which is really what I wanted to kind of talk about, and ways in which you can do that. Now, also, you can have like a blues. Blues is interesting because, you know, a lot of times we talk about blues and we're talking about blues in a kind of, you know, major key. So, you know, more often than not, when we think about a 12-bar blues, we're thinking about blues in a major key. But, you know, quite often, because we're dealing with blue intervals like blue thirds, which is kind of the nearest thing you can play on a piano is a minor third. So you kind of got kind of like the darkness of the blue notes against this kind of major third kind of thing going on. So you got that kind of tension going on that makes a blues unique. It's neither major nor minor, it's both. And that's kind of what makes it uniquely a blues thing. But you can have a blues that is in a minor key. John Coltrane famously played a very fine example. He wrote a piece when a church in Alabama was blown up by a bunch of racist idiots. And there were 4 black kids inside that church who all got killed. And that event in Alabama had such a profound impact upon Coltrane that he wrote this piece. And it is very dark. And it is very sad, but it's still a blues, and it's still incredibly emotional and stirring and effective, and it ends up going from being sad to being angry, righteously angry, and then back to being, you know, kind of mourning and grieving within the whole journey of the piece. It's very, very powerful and very, very effective. So how do we go about creating something that's minor but not sad, that gives that sense of urgency? Well, you can do it rhythmically, obviously. And there's, you know, a lot of stuff that you hear in dance clubs where there's, you know, EDM. A lot of EDM music played in dance club has this kind of, it's in a minor key or it's in a mode. It's either, you know, kind of minor in the natural minor sense. So, that being playing the natural minor scale. So it's either in that kind of minor key, you know, or it's based out of a Dorian mode or an Aeolian mode or something similar, which kind of gives it a slightly more ambiguous, slightly more open sound than just regular minor. So instead of, in this case, the G Dorian scale, normally with the harmonic minor, you go 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, major 7th, leading tone, into the tonic. But with the G minor scale shares the same key as the key signature of B flat major. So you have the B flat and the E flat. But you know it's not in B flat when you see lots of F sharps in the score. Then you know it's in G minor, because of that leading tone. Okay? But with the Dorian mode, it's a little bit different. We go up to the flat 3, then 4, 5, natural 6, flat 7, tonic. So it sounds a little bit major, a little bit minor. It's ambiguous sounding. So you can use that mode to create something that has that sense of forward motion. It's only a shade dark. It's not really properly, minor sounding dark. So I'm taking advantage of the fact that you have an E natural to use a C major triad instead of a C minor triad. And then the D minor. And all of a sudden, it doesn't sound quite as dark as which does sound dark. Which incidentally, a lot of Latin music, a lot of samba, salsa, mambo music is often in this, or it will just go between chord 1 and chord 5. And so, if you're into that kind of thing, you'd hear the piano kind of doing things like this. Let's see if I can do it. I've not played this style of piano in quite a while, so a little out of practice. But you'd hear something like. Hang on. So you get that kind of thing in, a salsa or mambo style of piano. It's called son montuno. And that's another way in which you can make something sad sound a little bit brighter, is by, trying some of those kind of ideas. All right, so I hope that some of that, and there was quite a lot of different things going on there, but I hope that some of that maybe has sparked some kind of creative ideas within you for writing in a minor key without making it sound sad and dark and make you want to kind of curl up in a little ball and cry, you know. Although, you know, that's relatively, you know, that's allowable. All right, let's see. We got questions. Lollipop Guild. What makes prog rock different from the rest? Prog rock actually has a lot of improvisation in it. A lot of improvisation. Group improvisation specifically. So if you listen to kind of, you know, some of the Genesis live records or Yes live records, any of those kind of live performances, you know, they'll or Pink Floyd, you know, they'll take one of their songs and then they'll just, you know, they'll get to the end of the song and then just stretch it out into, you know, another 5 or 10 minutes worth of group improvisation based off of the chord changes and the form and the structure of the song, so that the listener doesn't get bored at all. They can be listening to the same thing for 15 minutes and they are utterly transfixed because the musicians are interacting with each other, and they're expanding kind of the structure and the form of the song to create a, something that is improvised in the moment as a group together. Now, it's not going to sound like completely atonal music because, you know, there are restrictions that everyone agrees to, like the key that you're going to play in, the chord changes that you're going to play, that will form the foundation for the group improvisation. And so that's kind of what is a big ingredient in progressive rock. Another one is the borrowing of form, structure, harmonic concepts, melodic concepts, and ideas from different genres and kind of bringing them into rock music. So elements of jazz and jazz harmony find their way into that, but also classical music concepts as well. You know, form and structural ideas and compositional ideas from classical music also find their way into progressive rock to create, I think, for as much as they call it progressive rock, I think it's the wrong term. I think it's fusion music. Now, I know that immediately as soon as I say fusion music, your brain is immediately thinking of Kenny G, and that would be wrong, because Kenny G is not fusion music. When I say fusion music, I'm talking about taking a different style and bringing it into another one and making them fit together, kind of like an alloy, or, you know, kind of like a hand in a glove, or something like that, something analogous to that. That's what I mean by fusion music. I don't mean kind of cheesy sax melodies played over, you know, sloppy, slushy, schmaltzy string arrangements, which is what you get with Kenny G. I'm talking about fusing elements from different styles of music together to make something new. And certainly in the late 60s, early 70s, that started happening, and the progenitor of it all was Miles Davis. He was the guy that kind of started it all. And so you had rock musicians starting to hang out with jazz musicians starting to influence rock musicians influencing jazz musicians, classical musicians, and musicians from other cultures like India, and you get the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and, you know, other non-Western music forms made their way into rock music. And so you have this unique sounding music. And I think there were some real great contributors to that. I think drummer Neil Peart would be one. You know, he found a way to do something phenomenally creative within his own actual technical limitations on the drum set. He didn't have great chops particularly, but he had ideas, and he was able to think way outside of the box and wrote some fantastic songs for Rush that are just outstanding. I'm not a Rush fan by any stretch of the imagination, but he was a great songwriter, and he created a whole bunch of different ideas that, you know, helped spawn this whole progressive rock thing. So you know, if you play Rush alongside Duran Duran, for example, you'll hear two very, very different things. Duran Duran, very neat structure, very organized, you know, very kind of classical in that sense. And yet they were a little bit influenced by some jazz harmony. You know, their piano player was a jazz piano player and was influenced by Duke Ellington in particular. So that, you know, there were little undercurrents of that in their music, but not massively. They were a pop band with kind of a little bit of rock, a little bit of jazz thrown in. Whereas, you know, progressive rock, they're playing in different time signatures, they're playing in different keys, they are making use of, you know, alternative scales, modes that were not being explored much, and lots of improvisation. But yeah, prog rock is great stuff, really great to listen to. Excuse me. Darren West says, Quantum 2 user, Green Z, how do I print plugins on the input versus just monitoring through the plugins? And Kyle has the right answer, actually. He says, put the plugin on the insert, on the input channel. If you're not sure what that means, I can show you. So if I go over to Studio One here, the input channel is this section over here, and you click on this button here that says inputs. And as you can see, this is me talking to you. So if I were to grab, I don't know, if I were to grab, let's see, what could I put on here that would really demonstrate? If I was to grab, let's say, the analog delay and put it on here, now we've got some kind of stereo delay going on. And if I put it over on this channel as well, now we've got all sorts of kind of input delay going on. But if I was to close that for a second and add a channel here, and then if I record and I solo this, and if I was just to record, and if I went, let's go back to the beginning. And if I just talk like this into this, I should be recording. You can't hear it probably, but I should be recording through those plugins. All right, let's take it out of record mode. And if I just talk like this into this, I should be recording. You can't hear it probably, but I should be recording through those plugins. So there you go. That's printing the plugins directly to the track. All right, so if I go back to over here, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to remove both of those. But that is essentially how it's done. So the thing that you have to remember is that you have to, if you're going to record through anything on the inputs stage here, you have to set this right. Because when you record, you can't change it after the fact. Because what is recorded through whatever is in this insert section here. So if you've got like a couple of EQs, a couple of compressors in series, and a de-esser, and a reverb, all of that is going to be printed to your recording. And you can't suddenly go, oh, you know what? I've overcompressed the snare drum, or I've overcompressed the vocal. It sounds too, the dynamic range has been too squashed. Let me go back and adjust that compressor. And you can't do that because there's nothing inserted on the channel. It's over here. It's already been printed to the track. It's too late. So my advice, if you're going to do it this way, is make some test recordings so that you can set up what it is that you want with your plugins, and then be ready to record. But try and get it right here first, because you can't change it after the fact. So I hope that helps, Darren. That's a good question. Super Squirrel says, like a lingering suspense. Lingering suspenses are great. Unresolved tensions are great. I use them all the time. Film composers use them to great effect. So you can kind of do that in a whole bunch of ways. You can keep it really simple. For example, if I was to do and then finish the song there, that would be a completely unresolved tension, because it should resolve here. There's the resolution. But I could leave that hanging, leave it hanging, leave it hanging, leave it hanging, annoy your listener to death, and then resolve it. Or you could do something completely different. You could just leave it hanging deliberately. You could go, you have resolved to chord 1, but you've loaded chord 1 with a bunch of extra tensions. And you could just leave that hanging. And the human ear will cope with it, because you've anchored it to 1. You've gone. The human ear will not have a problem with that. Human ear will have a problem with this. And then if I just walk away. Now, with the advent of a lot of modern music and popular music, jazz, rock and roll, R&B, the human ear copes a lot better with unresolved dominant chords like that. But we still have a problem with it, because it is loaded so much with tension that I now have to resolve it. Now, if you're classically trained, like you're a classically trained concert pianist or violinist, or you're a classically trained pipe organist or something like this, and an old music teacher of mine from when I was at college was an organist and a classically trained pianist, and I used to annoy him with my favorite classical musician's practical joke. I would walk into the classroom whilst he was doing something at the end of a lesson, and I would just go, I'd do this for about 5 minutes, and then I'd just leave it there and walk out. And I'd walk down the corridor, and I'd wait down the corridor to hear him do this. Because he couldn't bear the tension. He had to go and resolve it. So suspensions can be really effective. And can be a lot of great use can be made of those. Let's go see what else we have question-wise. Rich Cresswell says, F minor or G minor, both natural and harmonic, are very popular in EDM. Yes, they are indeed. I'm not really an expert in those genres, but yeah, that would be correct, I think. Bill Bruford, yeah, great drummer, fantastic drummer. He's a real all-rounder, because he plays a lot of jazz and he plays a lot of rock and roll as well. But yeah, he's a great drummer. And he's a great guy as well. I have met him and spoken to him at great length. He's a great bloke. Let's see. Ronald says, Abstract Logics is a great place to explore all things fusion. Definitely. And late Miles Davis. So, Miles Davis from like 1968, 69, and onward through the 70s is a good place to start as well. And if you're not at all familiar with kind of stretching tonal ideas, stretching tonalities, and moving away from, specific diatonic, major, minor, key-centered chord changes for music. If your ears are not kind of at all adjusted to any of that, then listening to something like Miles Davis's Bitches Brew record will be a shock. It will. It'll be a complete shock to your system. It certainly was for me when I first heard it. And the very first time I listened to that record, it was incredibly shocking because, for a lot of it, I was just like, I have no idea what's going on here. There's no sense of key center. There's no sense of chord changes. What is going on here? It's like a lot of riffs. There's lots of riffs going on. And then there's lots of weird chord clusters being played by Chick Corea. Miles Davis is playing these exotic scales over the top. Jack DeJohnette, the drummer, is laying down a groove, but he's never playing the backbeat. He's always playing around it, but never actually playing it. And it was just like, it was bewildering. But I loved it. It was just like the first time I had a pint of beer ever in my life. I would have been a little bit underage, but we'll keep that just between me and you. And it was shocking. I had never tasted it before. I had never had alcohol before, particularly at that point. And it was a shock to the system. But I liked it. And so it was with Miles Davis and Bitches Brew and everything that followed it. But I loved it, and the more I listened to it, the more I understood it, the more my ears became accustomed to what he was doing. And the more I understood what he was doing. And it was incredibly liberating. And I suppose I had some help with it because I was already by that time in my life, very well versed in John Coltrane and, listening to Impressions and Giant Steps and all of those great pieces of his, and then his arrangement of the Rodgers Hammerstein song, My Favorite Things from The Sound of Music. And what he did with that kind of totally blew me away. So I kind of had a little bit of preparation, I suppose, but had I come strictly from just listening to the Glenn Miller Orchestra, and then suddenly somebody slaps on Miles Davis's Bitches Brew, that would be wow. That would be a slap round the face and a slap round the ear holes for sure. But yeah, I loved it. And I play it a lot. My wife doesn't have a clue what's going on. She likes the music, but she doesn't really have a clue what's going on, what it's about particularly. But she had never heard any of that stuff until she met me. For us, it was a little bit like, she has fairly broad kind of pop music tastes, and she loves her classical music, and that was kind of where she was musically. Me, on the other hand, very much into group improvisation, very much into playing around with music that has no tonal center, and all that kind of stuff. That was the stuff that I was into. So, one of the first times I was still living in London, and she came down to visit me, and one of the things I did was I played her Bitches Brew, and it was like, for her, massively impactful from listening to Beethoven and Brahms and all of that, to suddenly being slapped round the face by, group improvisation that is loosely based around a tonal center. And she likes it. She actually likes it now. But at first she was just like, what the heck? But you can totally adjust. John Edgar says, when I point my mouse on a MIDI note, it immediately deletes settings somewhere or mouse. It might be your mouse. because usually that function is reserved to when you double click the MIDI note. We can experiment with this. Let me close that. Let me go back over to my news thingy doodah. Here we go, and I'm going to go on the tuba because tubas are fun. Let's go and see what happens if I click on that note. See, if I single click on the note, all it does is highlight it. But if I double click it, it disappears. And I have to press Ctrl Z to get it back. So it might be that your mouse button itself might be a little bit oversensitive. And so when you're single clicking on it, it's actually registering a second click. That's possible, what's going on. But yeah, when I single click on it, you hear the note because I've got the audition notes button checked, and it just highlights. But if I was to double click on it, it goes away. So basically, you may need to adjust the sensitivity of your mouse buttons. If you're on Windows, there's probably settings where you can do that. And the same on Mac, there's probably settings where you can adjust the sensitivity. And it might be that the actual mouse itself is the problem. That's always a possibility. But yeah, single click won't delete the note. Double click will. All right, so I hope that that helps. That's actually a pretty good question. For sure. Let me there we go. Return that to where I want it to be. 2.5 unresolved. That's cruel. Yeah, it can be. Ronald says, Mahevish New Orchestra, my shocking introduction to fusion, and I loved it. Yeah, absolutely. Peter Brooks says, you got the storm up there? Yes, very much so. I'm a little bit, one of the things that I'm interested in is meteorology and storms and things like that, how storms kind of develop, how they work, and how they blow themselves out eventually. So I'm kind of interested in that. I don't study it incredibly deeply, but I do read, and I do have some kind of some stuff like I have some weather instruments, and I have them connected to my computer so that I can register things like, hey, what's the wind speed outside like in our back garden? And we clocked, I think, 97.6 miles an hour. That's the fastest we've had today. But it's been steady around about 65, 70 miles an hour, steady, with gusts going up to like 90 or so. So yeah, it's been pretty stormy here with Storm Dudley. I know there's other parts of Scotland that have had Storm Dudley much worse, like right on the coast of the east coast of Scotland. They've had a lot of trouble, a lot of damage. And the Highlands and Islands as well. John Hawk says, Bitches Brew is interesting. It really, really is. It's a great record. I love it. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, classical jazz and prog rock. Yeah, pretty much. That's exactly what it is. It is progressive rock. It's got rock music as its foundation, it's bedrock, and it's got these other things kind of built on top of it, which makes it sound pretty cool. I quite like this stuff. Alrighty, so we have got about a minute left. So if you have a question, get it in the chat and I'll take maybe one more. John Edgar says, I'm deeply engaged in weather phenomena as well. Go to YouTube and type direct weather. Yes, very cool. I will do that. I also follow a guy who is basically an extreme meteorologist. That's essentially what he did his doctoral studies in, was extreme weather and that kind of thing. So he is an expert in extreme weather, and he is a storm chaser, and his name is Dr. Reed Timmer, and I've been following his channel for maybe about 3 or 4 years, and he gets very, very up close and personal with tornadoes and other storms like ice storms and stuff like that. He gets very up close and personal with them, and studies them. He has all sorts of telemetry packs that he deploys to be able to capture data that he can then study to help further research into how tornadoes develop and how we can get better at predicting tornadoes and where and when they're going to touch down, that kind of thing. So he is worth checking out if you're into that kind of thing. Darren says, what bass is that behind you? That is a 1962 Fender jazz bass, fretless. It is very, very cool. I love it. It's a great instrument, and I've had that since 2013, I think is when I got it. It's a beautiful instrument, and it reminds me very much actually of my mum's bass. My mum's bass was a 65 or 66 Fender jazz bass. She had one of the first short neck basses, I think, and I can't quite remember when they first started coming out. But yeah, and so this one kind of reminds me a little bit of it. But it's also very reminiscent. If I just back up so you can take a bit of a look. It's also very reminiscent of Jaco Pastorius's Bass of Doom. It's the same kind of finish, same kind of color, and I did take the scratch plate off just like he did. But yeah, it's the same kind of finish as Pastorius's Bass of Doom, which is one of the reasons why I got it, really, because I am a big Jaco Pastorius fan. All right, I think we're done for the evening. Great questions, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Billy Morgan says, great show. Good night, everyone. Stay safe and God bless. No, it's not a Music Master. It's a Fender. It's an actual, genuine Fender jazz bass. I don't know whether they make it anymore, actually, to be honest. I think the nearest thing you can get to it now is... it's a bass made by Fender called the Ventura, I think it is, which looks kind of similar. Not quite the same thing. Enough time to explain aggregate device? No, we are going to go over with that. And I don't run a Mac, so aggregate devices are not really my thing because you can't do it on a Windows computer. I do have a Mac over there, but I can't run the show off the Mac. So... but aggregate devices are something you can definitely do on a Mac because of the way the Mac OS is compiled and built and the way their audio protocol works. You cannot do that on Windows, which is why, if I just show you this real quick, which is why when you go into Studio One and you go into Options here and you go to Audio Setup, you only see one device. You only see one device. Or is it on the start page where you see it? Let me see. Yeah, you only see the one audio device. On a Mac, you can select a different playback device from the recording device. So you have two interfaces, or the possibility to list two different interfaces here. But you don't get that on Windows because you can only use one interface at a time. Which is why when you are setting up for streaming and doing a show like this on Windows, it's a pain in the butt because it's not very possible unless you either use Loopback, which is what I'm using on the Studio 1824C, or you run two interfaces, which is what I used to do, which is what Jonny Guy also does, which is where you run the outputs of your main interface into a secondary interface, and then you use your streaming software to listen to that secondary interface. And it's kind of a workaround for the limitation that exists on a Windows PC. it is what it is. It's just the way that Microsoft chose to develop their audio engine and their audio protocol and how that all works. So it is what it is, unfortunately. But Alps Media says, let's connect after the live stream. Ronald says, did a little research. We'll probably need a bit of help. Yeah. I would say connect with Louis. Louis will talk you through how aggregating on a Mac works. I actually don't have an interface on the Mac. I only use the built-in on the Mac. At the moment, I am waiting for some new toys to come my way, which will help me do stuff better on the Mac. And maybe I can even run my show from the Mac as well sometimes. All right, folks, with that, we will end the show here. Thanks a lot for coming, and thanks a lot for your questions. And just time for me to say this show is in memory of my good friend Thomas Melkerson from the Philippines. Good night, everybody.